Shields and swords, field of wars, fighting my blood down to the core. Warriors from medieval age, fear the reign of night brigades. Crusades into the room, moving through the temples and tombs. Scared and place, prepare to face Professor Awesome and the minions of doom. 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 Professor Awesome and the minions of doom.
Hi, minions. So sometimes minions of doom and students will say to me, why do you hate the phrase there is, there are, there was, there were? Why do you hate those phrases so much? And it's because they lead to very weak writing, a very weak writing style in the sentence level. Now, to be clear, we're not talking about something that's grammatically incorrect. So you can have a perfectly grammatically correct sentence that begins, there is XYZ, right? Instead, there's two other reasons that we really want to talk about, and then we'll look at some specific sentences here. The first reason is that these sentences, there's something called an empty referent. An empty referent is usually a pronoun, but it can be something like the word there or sometimes this, that refers to something or is supposed to refer to something, but doesn't actually refer to anything. And we're going to see some examples of that later on, so I don't want to get too far into that. But sometimes there's a word that doesn't really appear, it doesn't really refer to something. It's an empty referent. It's supposed to refer, but it does not. The other thing has to do with the basic idea in your sentence level writing that you should let your nouns and verbs do the work of your sentences for you, right? So, for example, the subject of your sentence should be, that is not to say just the topic, but the grammatical, the main noun of your sentence should be an important noun. And the main verb, whenever possible, should be dynamic. Well, there is, there are, there was, there were, there, if it's an empty referent, unless it refers to a place, across the street or something, where it is not an empty referent, there is, as a subject of a sentence, doesn't refer to anything. So immediately it's weaker. And then the main verb is the be verb. And that be verb, in this case, of course, is, also a word that is not particularly strong. The be verb is a very helpful, a very central verb in English. Am, is, are, there, what, was, were. Those are all, it's very helpful, but it's not very dynamic. So let's look at some examples here. First, it's important to remember that not every use of the word there is an empty referent. So let's take the first sentence here. I used to live there. Well, there actually refers to a particular place. Maybe I used to live in Chicago. I used to live in Chicago. So you can replace there with Chicago. So that is not, in fact, an empty referent. And the subject of that sentence is I, and the main verb is live, or you might combine the whole verb phrase together into used to live. So that has a noun, a subject of the sentence, which is meaningful, and a verb that is meaningful. So we're not actually talking about every single use of the word there. But let's look at the next three sentences. And these three sentences are, in fact, taken from actual student papers in past years. So these are not ones I've made up. These are the kinds of things that students will have in their papers. So the first one says, there was a statement issued by Mickey Johnson, who was acting for Cherry's defense, Cherry being the name of a defendant in the case. All right, the subject of the sentence is there. But there does not refer to a place. In fact, there doesn't refer to anything. The phrase there was, in this case, is simply stating that something existed. And so because of that, we have a much, much weaker sentence than we might have had, because all that he's saying at this point, the student, is that this statement that Mickey Johnson issued exists. All right, so if we have a sentence like this, actually, let's look at the next two. There is also experience and insight to be gained from successful space exploration. Now, you could say that there, in this case, might be a place like outer space. But then when you try to put the sentence together and say, like, outer space is also experienced an insight, you realize, no, this is not a place. That's not outer space. It doesn't refer to anything. And the main verb there is the be verb is also. And again, the third sentence, there were millions of stars that were twinkling brightly in the sky. Again, all you're saying is that the millions of stars existed, right? Not where they were. This there in this case doesn't actually refer to the sky. It doesn't tell us really much of anything. And so each of these three sentences, the there was, there is, there were, these variants just tell us that something exists. Okay, so let's say that I've written this sentence, and it would not be strange to write these sentences. These are grammatically correct sentences. How will I, when I see this, how will I strengthen it? Well, all you have to do is first just remove the there is, there are, there was, there were. So let's look at this one. A statement issued by Mickey Johnson, who was acting for Jerry's defense. All right. So this gives us the important parts of the sentence. Now, obviously, this is not grammatically correct. So we have to figure out what we want the subject of the sentence to be and what we want the main verb to be. Now, statement could be, I think, a good subject for the sentence. However, in this case, a better verb, of course, would be issued, because that's an action, right? So instead, I would argue that Mickey Johnson should be the subject of the sentence. So instead of saying a statement issued by Mickey Johnson, who was acting in Cherry's defense, we'd say Mickey Johnson, who is acting in Cherry's defense, issued a statement. Right? And that's just a much more dynamic sentence. Mickey Johnson, who was acting for Cherry's defense, issued a statement. Okay. Let's look at the next sentence. You can already see what we're going to do. We're going to take this there is off of here, and we see experience and insight, also experience and insight to be gained from successful space exploration. Now, again, what we have here is not particularly, it doesn't make grammatical sense. We have to figure out what we want the subject to be. I don't think experience and insight in this case are really great subjects. And partly we see that they have the passive voice to be gained here. So we have a couple other options. One is space exploration. Space exploration could be the subject. Also, there's an implication of people, right? So we gain experience and insight from successful space exploration would be another option. I think in this case, they're trying to the writer here seems to be using the there is, there are, there was, there were, because they want to de-emphasize people and focus on space exploration. So in that particular case, I think probably making space exploration the subject would be a better way to do it. So what I would say is something like successful space exploration also offers experience and insight. Okay. We can get rid of that. Oops, here we go. Let's get rid of that. And we just see here that that's a much more dynamic sentence. Of course, people also gain experience and insight through successful space exploration would also work as a sentence. Scientists, NASA, some other subject in that. All right, so you already know what we're going to do for the next one. We're going to get rid of there were, and we're left with millions of stars that were twinkling brightly in the sky. One thing you can often do when it's there is, there are, there was, there were, and then a little bit further in is the set word that. You can simply also just delete the word that. And now we have a sentence. Millions of stars were twinkling brightly in the sky. And that was really all they wanted to say, was that the stars existed. But here now the stars are the subject and they're doing something. They are twinkling. So here are just a few examples that you've seen from my classes. And if you the next piece of writing that you do, if you go through and you find everywhere you've used there is, there are, there was, there were, and it's very easy fix. It's just to search for the word there, and you go through and you find it. And then you rewrite those sentences, strengthening them in the way that I've talked about here today. Then, if you practice that over your writing for a time, eventually you won't have to practice it anymore, and you will just naturally start to choose stronger subjects and stronger verbs for your sentences, and thus your writing will improve.